Good afternoon, players, gamers, and critters. I am Master Mimic, and welcome back to Roaring D20s, my little show where I sit here and talk about all things D&D related. So, last time I talked about my top 5 PCs, and it got me thinking. Since I was talking about the progression of seeing what essentially turned from scribbles on a character sheet to a full-fledged legendary character that brought a smile to my face, I started to think about my evolution as a GM. How I went from essentially just a greenhorn player sitting behind a character sheet and having no idea what the heck a saving throw was, to essentially standing behind the GM screen every other game session, lording over my would-be players with a grin on my face. I'm just kidding, I love you guys. So I thought I would talk about the influences that went towards what made me into a GM. And there was one event that occurred that was most prolific in my my evolution, and it goes back several years. Just so you guys know, this is essentially a D&D horror story, so buckle up. This is going to be a fun one. So I had jumped into this group that had been together for, I want to say, about 5 years. I don't quote me on that exact number. I just know that these guys have been playing together for a while, and for the sake of anonymity, I will refer to them as Cooper, Rage, the Experimenter, and Tanis. So these guys were actually, pretty experienced. Obviously, I was just barely getting started. This wasn't my very first game. Where I had my half-elf fighter, Wilhelm. This was more, I want to say it might even have been my second or third game I played with these guys. But this was one where they were very apparent. This was a major adventure. This was a continuation to a campaign that apparently Cooper had started way back when, during junior high. So the setup for this the setup for this game was it took place hundreds of years after the events of their last adventure. Again, I wasn't there for this, but essentially their original player characters had taken over the world. One guy had become a god. Another one had become the right hand of God, the other one the left hand, and they ruled over this kingdom that lorded over the entire world and was essentially untouched. There were some pockets of resistance here and there, but the GM was very quick to explain that these resistances were quickly put down. There were also a few free countries here and there, but it was very heavily implied that their independence was it wasn't going to last very long. So now you have me jumping into this game, and I mean, I guess the cool part of this is that their past adventures had essentially become lore, and so if I could just eavesdrop on what NPCs were talking about, or if I asked the right questions, I would essentially get a good what's the term? I'd be essentially given good information, knowledge, detailing the past adventures of these characters and what to expect. But what was very prevalent in the entirety of this nation was this god, which I will refer to as the God King, was untouchable. He was the god of gods. He essentially had started his own religion, essentially Knights Templar status, but with magic and with oversized guns. But these guys were tough. These guys were the best. There was no touching these guys. And then you have my character. He was a paladin who had sworn his service to the God King, and I would go out and I would destroy anyone who stood in the way of his holy word and violated the tenets of his faith, as a good paladin would. Joining me was Rage, the Experimenter, and Tanis. These three, obviously, like I said, these guys had been in this adventure many times, and I was just jumping in for the first time. So I kind of took a backseat to a lot of stuff. I didn't make a lot of decisions, at least early on, because, again, I was kind of a novice here. I didn't know what this world was or anything like that. While these guys knew full well who these characters were, I mean, we'd encounter NPCs that these three guys would get all excited for, while I would just sit there, with a question mark over my head. It would be like when I went to go see the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, the first one, with my dad, and every little reference, this guy is just giggling at everything, and I'm just there going, what's so funny about that? Anyway, so we start off the game, and essentially what we were told is there was a elven resistance being, started in a nearby forest, and we had to go investigate. So anyway, the quest that we were given was that there was a brewing rebellion going on in a local forest thanks to some elves. These elves were going out and they were freeing slaves. Oh yeah, by the way, this nation also heavily practiced slavery. So in case you needed to more of an indication that this was not a great kingdom. So you have the slaves being freed, you have the supply caravans being raided, you have weapons being sabotaged or stolen. It was just crazy. They needed us to go out and find this group of rebels and just wipe them out. A perfect job for the Paladin of the God King. After all, I was, a fresh-faced youth ready to plunge my blade into these heretics. So, we got up and we headed out. Something that was quickly apparent was our quest giver was originally one of the player characters. I believe he belonged to the Experimenter. This guy was clearly up to something. The GM, Cooper, made very apparent that this guy was, not to be fully trusted. Not that anyone else in the group was going to take that advice because, well, they they knew full well who he was, and they weren't about to, stomp on his fingers or anything. So, obviously, as a player, I had to quickly realize, okay, so something's not right. Something's going to come and bite us in the butt at some point. This guy is just way too creepy, and the circumstances of our mission were vague at best. But this was kind of the moment I learned the importance of player knowledge versus character knowledge, because my character is a starry-eyed paladin of the God King, and I'm the one looking at these guys knowing full well something's afoot, but they're all just sitting there grinning ear to ear, knowing full well that something really badass is about to happen. Anyway, so we get to these... we get to the forest, and lo and behold, there are the rebels, these elves who are malnourished and broken and beaten and not nearly the kind of threat that would, be a threat to the great kingdom of the God King. So, obviously, we were duped, basically. These guys were rebels, but more in the way of, when you get people excited when they see riots in the streets thinking it's going to be the next, American Civil War kind of thing. And so we get to this forest, and we find these elves, and instead of fighting... And anyway, so we get to the forest, and we find these rebels, and they are nothing like what was described. These guys were malnourished, barely scraping by. Their weapons were in poor shape. They were wearing basically patch meal armor. It was bad. Really, really bad. And we had to essentially make a choice here. I mean, we could slaughter them in droves, but what would be the point? They weren't a threat to the kingdom, and yet why were we sent to apprehend them? Well, it turned out they had stolen an artifact that was bound for the capital, and they had actually no real idea what it was. They just knew that if it was so important that the right hand of the God King wanted it, then they needed it. And, well, me being a paladin, I had an understanding what this was. It had belonged to the one of the great enemies of the God King. They called him the Great Heretic. And the Great Heretic was responsible for launching this massive rebellion against the God King and his forces. But again, like I said, these guys were untouchable. So the Great Heretic and his forces were routed, slaughtered, and the Great Heretic himself was beheaded, and his helm was collected so that it could be mounted on a wall in the great capital palace. The thing was, though, is this was around the time where, as a paladin, I started to kind of second guess myself. Up to this point, I had had a conversation with the Lord Paladin, and he was a little vague on certain things. I know I say that a lot in this game, but, obviously these guys were up to something. The Lord Paladin essentially told me, just cut them down. Don't let them talk. Don't let them speak. If they are trying to convert me, they're heretics and need to be slain on sight. But I'm looking at these guys. Again, like I said, I am a starry-eyed paladin, but I am also young. My character is not experienced and hardened or anything. So when I see these weak, trembling elves with this artifact that, although it is fairly important to my faith, they have absolutely no idea what the heck it even is. And yes, I even rolled to, sense their motive, and the GM, Cooper, told me just flat out, they have no idea what this thing is. And so at this point, we started to think, do we really cut down these elves and bring this artifact back to the right hand and most likely be betrayed and murdered, or do we try to do something with this? Well, it surprised me to find out that these guys were totally okay with us just flat out betraying the kingdom. Granted, I should have known better. Hindsight is 20/20, but I'll get to that. But anyway, so we were completely down with turning our backs on the kingdom and actually try to help this rebellion. Although it wasn't necessarily a, try to usurp the throne of the God King and take over the capital. If anything, we knew the fight ahead of us was not going to be an easy one. But dagnabbit, we knew it was going to be cool. And being a paladin, I decided that my motivation was that we would be essentially staging a distraction, a full-scale assault on the capital that would attract the military's attention, while the women and children of this, quote, rebellion fled deeper into the forest and away from their agents. This is where the game started to, take a turn. Because, essentially, we had done something that Cooper wasn't expecting. He did not expect us to turn our backs on the kingdom. He did not expect us to just flat out betray, our god. He didn't punish me as a paladin, at least at first. He did have me... he did punish me as a paladin because, like I said, I had pledged my faith to the God King, and so I quickly became an anti-paladin. I had to work things around, and it kind of annoyed me because, again, my character wasn't evil. He just didn't... He was having a crisis of faith. Where was the God King to appear to him and give him, you must take your place in the circle of life, Simba. That kind of thing. No, it was... No, you turned against your faith. You're evil now. So I decided to embrace it. Fine. My character was going to crown himself the new Great Heretic, something that the rest of the party just found so entertaining. Again, I should have known better, but hindsight's 20/20. So, essentially, the GM tried to punish us by sending an NPC at us who apparently was somebody that they knew from their past adventures. He didn't necessarily pose as big of a threat, but only because I was able to score a couple of well-timed critical hits on her, or him, sorry. And so with him defeated, it was okay. We did it. We killed them. Except something was shocking. Was all the guys at the table after we killed him took a moment, a moment of silence. So, essentially, to punish us for our misdeeds, the GM sent an NPC after us that apparently a lot of them had known from previous games. I mean, he had a name and everything, an origin story, and all the other players were so excited, oh my god, there he is, that's so cool, and, again, I had no idea who this guy was. I just knew he was an enemy who needed to be killed. And I did. A couple of well-timed critical hits on him, and he was down for the count, permanently. I wish. I'll get to that. So, after that, the guys took a a moment of silence to essentially come to terms with this character's demise. That is when I realized just how important this character was. This was a NPC that had followed them through many adventures, and it kind of felt like they were angry at me because I did the killing blow. But again, what else was I supposed to do? I wasn't about to, if I'm playing a Star Wars game and someone throws Boba Fett at me, I'm going to shoot Boba Fett. I'm not going to hesitate just because he's Boba Fett. And so that's kind of how it went. So this NPC was dead. And that was kind of like our first step into this greater rebellion, the kindling that ignited the fires of revolution, kind of. But at that point, it was apparent, okay, the kingdom just sent this guy after us. They know that we're, they know we're traitors. We need to figure stuff out quick. We need to get this plan rolling. So we did. Tanis was able to make me a mock-up of the Great Heretic's armor based off of a holy book that I kept in my person. I actually thought that was kind of a cool role-playing moment. Rage was, all ready for combat. Yeah, let's do this! The Experimenter was wary, but, confident. And then we gathered our strongest forces and we laid siege to the capital. It was, to be fair, Cooper did amazing at selling the scope of this siege. It was like, it was one of those desperate struggles. There was no way we were going to win this, but like I said, this was just a distraction so the women and children could flee. So we threw all of our might against the capital, and during this battle, lo and behold, there is the Lord Paladin, my former master and mentor. He proclaims me a traitor, and he and I go blade to blade, and I went up against this guy solo, which was surprising to me because, again, the Lord Paladin was an NPC that every player had known from their past adventures. So the fact that Cooper gave me, the honor of facing this guy on my own was pretty epic, and I don't use that word often. The rest of the party stormed the palace and fought the right hand of the God Emperor, or God King himself, and it didn't last very long. Essentially, these guys were, I think we were like level 7 or 8, and the big bad was about level 20-something. I say 20-something because it was literally one round, he had 2 of their guys, I think it was Rage and Tanis down for the count. But meanwhile, here I am fighting the Lord Paladin, blades clashing, mouths frothing as we're just locked in mortal combat. The new Great Heretic versus the Lord Paladin. Unfortunately, again, the Lord Paladin was several levels above me, and when you got the apprentice fighting the master's gonna score some pretty decent hits on him. And yeah, the apprentice was, badly beaten. I even believe that, yes, the Lord Paladin then dealt a fatal blow to me. He drove his sword through my sternum, impaled me. And I asked Cooper, I looked at him in the eye and I said, hey, am I dying? He goes, yes, actually, you basically have one more round until you fall unconscious and die and bleed to death. So what I did with my turn was, because essentially I was so close to him, I grabbed his wrist, I pulled myself deeper onto his sword, drew my revolver, like I said, we paladins had a big revolver, put it against his temple, and blew his head off his shoulders. Again, this was a moment where the whole table went quiet, as they're all looking at me, shocked. I had killed the Lord Paladin. I didn't just kill their Boba Fett, I then went on and I killed essentially their Obi-Wan Kenobi, all within one game. And the way they just kind of looked just so distraught and horrified told me that even the players did not expect this battle to end in my favor. But I was telling myself, heck, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna bring this guy with me. So, cock, boom! The Lord Paladin fell, but so did I. But I thought that my character could, pass on to the next world, knowing full well that I had essentially dealt a fatal blow to at least the Paladin order of this kingdom. I wish that's what happened. I wish that the rebellion, despite its, despite the fact that it was doomed to fail, I wish the rebellion had been something. Cooper then describes that all of our characters are brought back to life. We awaken in the throne room of the capital, facing down an avatar of the God King. He's not happy with us, especially me. He states that our treason will not go unpunished, and that the fact that a paladin could betray his faith and turn to the great evil powers of the dark heretic, or the great heretic, I should not be spared. And so that is when he revealed that not only was Boba Fett back from the dead, but so was Obi-Wan, as the Lord Paladin stepped out, taking his place beside the God King, and Boba Fett just kind of looking at us, grinning. Essentially, it became apparent that the God King had resurrected these lieutenants to prevent the fall of his empire. So many emotions went through me at that moment. I essentially realized that for months we had been playing this game. For months we had waged this bloody rebellion against the kingdom. And it was all for nothing. Because with the flick of his wrist, the God King just brought them back. With no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was just, that's what happened. The other players were ecstatic. Hey, they're alive again! Yay! But I wonder if that was more to my detriment. Because, again, who was I, a new player in their group, to kill these two great NPCs that these guys had known for years? It's almost like a how dare you, And it hurt me, I was really happy that I not only soloed the Lord Paladin, but I'm the one who dealt the fatal blow to him. That I was the one who pulled the trigger and I ended him. But it was all for nothing. That whole game was in the snap of his fingers. The whole game was made for nothing. Apparently I was the only one who thought this, because the whole table was just like all laughing and having fun, but Again, these were guys who, you know, they expected that we were going to fail. And yet the fact that we didn't, if anything, the one of the things they kept saying was, "I'm surprised we got so far," and whatnot. So it wasn't great. I wasn't having a lot of fun at that moment. And of course, then to rub salt on the wound, Cooper then announced that the women and children had been found, rounded up, and executed. They had essentially lined them up in the town square and killed every last one of them. At least the women. The children were all taken as slaves. So once again, we failed. And so the game ended with all of us being punished. But my character had the most egregious of punishments. Essentially, my soul was ripped out of my body. A spell or a curse was placed on me, so my soul would be in torment for all eternity. And they put me in an insignia to the god king, and they placed it in one of his temples, so that essentially I'd be in constant pain while also listening to the sermons of this god king for all eternity. The others essentially were just imprisoned for the rest of their lives. But that's what I mean by, it felt like I was being punished because I was the one who basically spat in the face of their status quo. I know I'm a little, aggressive right now, but it's just, this is the kind of thing, these are the kind of emotions I felt that day. And these are the kind of emotions that led me to becoming the GM I am now. Because what I saw at the end of that game was that this was a GM who did not want things to change. I mean, I have no idea what he had planned for us. If we had wiped out these elves and returned, we probably would have been killed, slaughtered, but that was the plan. But we went against the plan. And because I was one of the instigators of the plan, I had to be punished. They could not see this world change. In their eyes, the kingdom was untouchable. The God King was untouchable. His lieutenants untouchable. But the fact that I actually managed to blemish that perfect face of this story, I had to be punished. And yeah, so what that essentially told me was that was not the way I wanted to, go about my games. In fact, I go so far out of my way to try and have certain adventures, like essentially, sure, you can have a couple of small adventures, nothing, life-changing, but if circumstances lead to an entire country being involved, an entire realm or entire world becoming involved, I will accept that. In fact, a lot of times in our games, the world has changed many times. Countries rise and fall, kingdoms or, sovereigns rise. It's just something that I always hate from GMs is when they refuse to let things change, or they have a plan, and if you go against that plan, you will be punished for your insolence. I've always hated that. I mean, it's, if you are having an adventure where you basically state that, it's essentially, you're getting from point A to point B, at least let us know ahead of time. Don't give us the illusion that our choices matter. Because when we get to the end where it turns out that all of our choices, or I guess more specifically, my choices were for naught. Killing Boba Fett, killing the Lord Paladin, only for the God King to wiggle his nose and bring them back. Well, it's not fun. And yeah, I did tell the GM this. I said, I'm not happy with this. And he said, well, I don't expect you to be happy. That's, you kind of brought it on yourself. Anyway, I'm sorry that I kind of got negative in this, but like I said, this was kind of meant to be a horror story and a personal experience of mine that paved the way towards me becoming a GM. To this day, I really don't have any grievances against these guys. I mean, obviously, I try not to bring outside drama to the game table. So, yeah, I did come back for more sessions, and for the most part, these adventures that preceded, these adventures that came after this one were a lot better. I wonder if the GM kind of took my complaints into consideration. I'm going to say he did because to this day I still respect him, and I still talk to Rage, Experimenter, and Tanis. Those guys are cool. Maybe not as much as I should, but you know, this was years and years ago. We all have our different treks in life. So essentially, what to learn from this is be fluid as a GM. If you can't accept that the players are going to make decisions that you yourself either don't predict or that you don't accept, then you need to consider the fact that this isn't a game about you. This is a game about everybody. That's something I said in my Bad GMs episode was Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, tabletop gaming, etc. It is not you versus them. It's about everyone at the table sitting down and having a great time. If you're going out of your way to maintain the status quo so egregiously that you essentially retcon the decisions made, after weeks and months of playing, you need to reconsider your place as a GM. Because that's not how a fun game is played. Anyway, so that was my story. And I hope you guys learned a thing or two from it. I am Master Mimic, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Have a good one, everybody.